to start our mill project. Step one on our mill project is to go ahead and take our rough block and square it and get it down to its overall dimension. In order to do that, we have to find the part on the mill. To do that, we're going to zero out our knee, and we're going to zero out the DRO. The DRO is a digital readout. Okay, that's what DRO stands for. It's got 3 axes. The top one is the x-axis, the middle one is the y-axis, and the bottom one is the z-axis of the quilt. What the DRO does for us is when we locate the part with the cutter, we can zero the DRO, and then any movements we make after zeroing the DRO keeps track of how far we move the table, in or out, or left and right. And it allows us to take precise amounts of material off, as well as locate features like holes or pockets or things like that. So to start, we need to locate the part in the z-axis. When we're squaring a block, we're going to move the knee to make our cuts and set in our depth of cuts when we're doing the faces of our block. So to zero the knee, we're going to move the workpiece underneath our cutter. Okay, we're going to get ready to turn the machine on, and we're slowly going to bring the knee up until the workpiece contacts the cutter. We're going to be looking for little wisps of material. We're going to be listening to try and hear material being cut. When we hear and see that, we're going to stop raising the knee, and we're going to zero out the dial on the knee hand wheel. So here we go. And we bring this up real slow until we just see or hear material coming off. Now there it went. Once it's there and you've cut material, we know that the tip of that cutter, or the end of the cutting tool, and the top of our workpiece are in exactly the same plane. So at this point, we're going to come down here to our knee dial. You're going to loosen this black collar. That will allow us to rotate this without moving the knee. And we're going to set that to 0. And then we'll lock this black collar back up. What that does now for me, any way I move this, will keep track of how much I move the knee up or down. So I'm going to lower the knee by a few thousandths. Okay, that was 100 thousandths. Okay, so now the gap between the top of my block and the bottom of my cutter is 100 thousandths large. So now I'm going to move out of the way. And we have this set now, and we can go ahead and proceed on taking light passes off, using this to indicate how much we're removing at any given time. Now we have to zero the DRO in X and potentially in Y. For the first part where we're going to square a block, we really only need to worry about zeroing in X. So to do that, what I'm going to end up doing is moving the table after I turn the cutter on. I'm going to move the table until I just contact the end of this piece. Once I see material come off, we will go ahead and zero out the digital readout. So I'm going to move the table until I just hear or see Okay, there we heard material getting cut. Now I know that the end of the, or the edge of the end mill and the edge of my part are in plane with each other. So I'm going to come up to the Z-axis DRO. I'm going to hit the little arrow button twice. And that will zero out the DRO. Now, however far I move the table, it's going to register up here. So I've moved the table 1.570 inches from that original zero spot. It's the exact same process for doing the y-axis, except we're going to be contacting the front or back of the part to zero. All right, we're ready to go ahead and start cutting. We just went over how to zero our DRO. Right now, my goal is to clean up the end of my workpiece and get it nice and smooth. And do the same thing to one face of my workpiece. When I clean up one end and one face, I'm going to flip the part over, and I'm going to go ahead and cut however much material I need to get down to the finished dimensions referenced on the plan. So I'm going to go ahead and fire this up. I'm going to touch off on the end of the part, and I'm going to take maybe 0.010 of an inch off for my first pass. I just want to clean this up. And we want to make sure that when we're edge milling, we are always moving the table out towards us. Okay, that way we're conventional milling as opposed to climb milling. It's much safer. So here we go. Turn the machine on. I'm going to bring in my table till I just hear material coming off again. And there it's just starting. If you're not zeroed on your DRO, zero your DRO. I'm going to move the workpiece off of the tool, and I'm going to dial in 0.010 of an inch on my DRO. Okay? What that number up there represents is how much material I'm going to take off on this pass. So I'm slowly going to bring the vise and the table out towards me, removing a little bit of material. This isn't a fast process. Nice and easy. If you go too fast, you're going to burn out the end mill, okay? Break the end mill, okay? Or you're going to damage or mar up your workpiece. So nice and easy. So you get all the way from one end to the other. Okay, I'm going to shut off. I'm going to check my cut. If I've cut the entire surface, which I have here, this is now nice and clean. Okay, I'm ready to go ahead and clean up the top surface of my piece. So to do that, I need to go ahead and switch tools real fast. And I'm going to switch from an end mill to a face mill. We'll bring the workpiece underneath the cutter. I'm going to turn the cutter on. I'm going to dial in my speed for this particular setup. I'm going to raise the knee until I just hear material coming off. Right there. I'm going to zero the dial on my knee. I'm going to move off the workpiece. Okay, and I'm going to dial in a depth of cut. So for this top surface, maybe 0.010, 0.015. We just want to barely clean this top surface up. So on the dial, I'm going to go 15. And I'm going to go ahead and run the table nice and easy. Okay, the chips that come off of here tend to be a little hot, so there are shields floating around the shop that you can put up to protect you from any flying debris. I'm going to have to do this. It's going to take me 3 passes to cut the entire surface of this part. Once I'm all the way past, I'm going to move in Y, and I'm going to overlap my cut slightly, and I'm going to go back the other direction. Make sure you're all the way past the part before you move in wide. And we'll overlap a little bit and cut that final pass. And we'll take a look at our stock. Okay, now on inspecting, I can see that we've cut the entire surface so that I know this surface and this face or edge are perfectly perpendicular to one another. So I'm going to go ahead and take the part out right now. All right, and you can see nice and smooth, nice and smooth. My next step is to take this part and flip it like this so I can clean up the opposite face and the opposite edge. Before I do that, I want to deburr this part because there has been a burr that's been turned up slightly on this piece. And when I put this in here, I do not want it to interfere with the vise, and I don't want it to interfere with any of the parallels. So on these surfaces, just going to lightly hit this with a file so that there's no sharp edges anywhere on here. Okay, nice and easy. Again, I just had it in the vise like this, so I'm going to flip it so I can cut a new face and a new edge. Alright, we've cleaned up the bottom surface, we cleaned up an end, we flipped our part over. Now we have to go ahead and take this top face and clean it up, and then we're going to take a measurement to see where we're at, and then I'm going to continue to remove material until I get to the dimension called out on my print. So again, we're going to turn it on. I'm going to slowly bring up the knee until I hear material coming off. I'm going to zero the dial, come off the workpiece. And we'll dial in 10,000ths. We'll cut all three passes. Three passes to cut the entire surface. That 10,000ths I just took off was enough to clean up this surface. What I need to do now is I need to measure the current thickness of this block. So without changing anything, I'm going to take my calipers, making sure there's no burrs here, and I'm going to measure the thickness of this block right now. Okay, and right now I am at 968 thousandths. So I'm at 968. And according to the plans, I need to be at 900 thousandths. So quick math tells me I need to take an additional 68 thousandths off to get this down to the finished dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and on this pass, I'm going to take 30 thousandths. I'm going to cut, and then I'm going to take another 30 thousandths pass, okay, for a total of 60. And then I'm going to remeasure and dial in my very last cut, so that is a fairly shallow cut, and it'll be a lot more precise once I have a better number. So this will be 2 passes, 30 thousandths each time, and then we will stop and remeasure our part. So dial in, there's 10, 20, 30. Okay, each one at 30 thousandths. So if my math, I took 60 thousandths off, that means I should have about 8 thousandths left. So I'm going to remeasure. And check here. Okay, and that is telling me I'm at 909 thousandths. So I have 9 more to go. So I'm going to dial in 9 thousandths on my knee. And I'm going to go ahead and take my final pass here. So that was 9 thousandths. Now in theory, if I remeasure this, I should be at exactly 900 thousandths for my finished thickness. And there we are, 899. So we're within 1,000th of an inch, so we're good. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch out the end mill, or excuse me, the face mill for an end mill, and we're going to clean this end up and get it down to our finish length. Just faced both of our faces down to the correct dimension. Now it is time for us to go ahead and clean up this end. We already did this end in a previous setup, so now we're going to go ahead and do this end. We're going to clean it up, and then we're going to go ahead and continue to mill away until we get to our required length. On this part, the required length is 4 inches. So we're going to fire up the machine. I'm going to touch off. I'm going to zero my DRO, and I'm going to start nibbling away 10 thousandths at a time and take a measurement and then calculate how much I need to remove total and go from there. So I'm going to turn it on, dial in my RPM based on the cutter, and I'm going to go ahead and touch off on the end here. There we go. 0. And now each pass I'm going to take is 10 thousandths of an inch. There's 10. Nice and easy. Once I have the entire surface cleaned up, I'm going to take a measurement just like I did when I did the face of my stock, and I'm going to see how much material is there versus how much I want when I'm done, and calculate how much I need to take off total to get to that dimension. So that looks like it cleaned up this entire surface. So I'm going to go ahead and measure and see where I'm at now. And I am at 3,950. And I believe we have to get to 3,900. So I have about 50 thousandths to take off. Now remember, we can only do that when we're cutting with bringing the vise out. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the part back in. Okay, I'm going to dial in 10 more thousandths on my DRO. I'm going to cut. I'm going to do this until I get to about 40 thousandths, so 2-3 more passes. And then I'm going to remeasure and make sure I know what I need for that final pass to get right in on that finished dimension. about 40 thousandths after my 0 point, and I had calculated that I had about 50 thousandths to take off, so I'm going to go ahead and double check my numbers, make sure I don't go past my 3 inches 900 thousandths. Okay, and according to this, I still have about 25 thousandths to take off. Okay, 24 thousandths. So I'm going to do that in 3 passes. I'm going to do 2 more passes at 10 thousandths apiece. Okay, I will double check one last time, but that last pass should be about 4 thousandths. So coming back to the beginning, we'll dial in 10 thousandths more, and then I'm going to continue until I get real close to my number. One last check. This should be about 4 or 5 thousandths bigger than what I need. Yeah, and we're about 3.5 thousandths bigger than our finished dimension. So I'm going to go ahead, come back to our start point. Okay, go back to where we were on our DRO, which was 60. Right, and I'm going to take my additional 4 thousandths, 3.5, 4 thousandths off. So this should be my final pass. All right, let's take a look. 3.90 on the dot. Perfect. So my next step is I'm going to take the part out, I'm going to clean up the burrs, and we're going to set up to cut the other 2 edges that we have not cut yet. Alright, we're ready to go ahead and cut the other 2 edges of our part. There's a couple ways we could have done this. We could have edge milled. Okay, we could have just turned the part 90 degrees and used the end mill to edge mill the 2 remaining surfaces. I chose to go with the face mill. The reason this will work is because I have a solid amount of material inside this vise, and I don't have a ton sticking up here. If I have a lot sticking up, I'm going to get a lot of vibration, which is going to lead to a really, really awful cut and some pretty horrible noises. So I'm going to kind of center the end mill or the face mill on my part. I'm going to turn it on, raise the knee up until I contact my part or touch off. I'm going to 0 the knee, and I'm going to take a light pass off. I'm going to then take the part out, file it, flip it over, set it back in there, and mill my part down to its finished dimension, which is 2.9 inches. So here we go. Turn it on, dial in your speed, and slowly bring the knee up until you touch off. Right there. 0 the knee. Then move the workpiece out from underneath the cutter. Okay, we're going to take 10 thousandths. And we're going to cut this surface real quick here. Alright, so that cleaned that entire surface up nicely. I'm going to remove the part from the vise. I'm going to hit it with a file just to deburr it, so when it goes in the vise those burrs don't get in the way. Okay, I'm going to take the face or the edge that I just milled and I'm going to place it down in the vise. Make sure there's no gunk in there. I'm going to put this in here so that there is a slight piece of the block sticking out beyond the vise. The reason I'm going to do that is because I want to be able to measure this as I'm cutting, and I want to avoid taking the part in and out of the vise repeatedly. So I'm going to hold that there. I'm going to go ahead and snug up the vise. Give it a gentle tap, make sure it's seated tight down on the vise here. Give it a little tap, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to come back here, I'm going to lower the knee, come back underneath my workpiece. I'm going to turn it on, I'm going to touch off, re-zero the knee, and cut this surface. Touched off, zero, come off the part. I'm going to take another 10 thousandths off. And again, I'm going to measure. I'm going to measure to figure out where our piece is right now and determine how much I need to take off to get down to that finished dimension. So here's why we left a little bit sticking out, so I can come in here and measure. So I'm at 2 inches, 975 thousandths. So according to my math, I need to get down to 2.9. So I have 75 thousandths to take off. So I'm going to start, I'm going to do 2 passes at about 30, and then I'm going to remeasure. So we'll dial in 30 more thousandths. So that was 2 passes at 30 for a grand total of 60 thousandths. So if my math is still correct, I should have about 15 thousandths more to take off. Okay, but we always want to double check, because I'm looking here and I have a little more than 15 thousandths to remove. I've got, no, a little less, sorry. I've got 13 thousandths more to go to get to my dimension. So for my final pass here, we'll dial in 13 thousandths. There's 10, 11, 12, 13. And make this final cut. Okay, before you take your part out of the vise, okay, or you change any settings, measure and make sure you're at the dimension that you want. So again, we're shooting for 2 inches, 900 thousandths. And there we are, 2 inches, 900 thousandths. So we've now successfully cleaned up all 6 surfaces on our part. Okay, they are all down to dimension within a couple of thousandths of an inch. Take your part out, take a file, and clean up every single one of these edges, because these are all going to be really, really sharp right now. So every edge and corner gets hit with a file.